Okay, this is our fourth in the behaviors section of our notes. This is the second part from the media, loosely associated with chapter 7 in your textbook. I talked about this before, but this is where what is news, this is what people want, something that's different. Again, the old saying, whether people are going to buy, is it going to be a headline that says, man bites dog or dog bites man? When things are trivial or too complex, it doesn't work good on the news. And here's where today we have more entertainment over information, and again, the whole idea of trying to get money for things. Now, the 2016 campaign for Trump, and even in the 2020 campaign, Trump was able to get a lot of what would be seen as free media. Now, some of it is not positive, but this is where you kind of think for Hollywood, any media is good. It is estimated that he got as much as $5 billion in free advertising, where sound clips that were played over and over again, and parts of his speeches and the following that he had. Even CNN in this campaign, people are complaining, saying that CNN gives almost 3 times the amount of time to Trump as they do to Biden. Again, it's not all positive, most of it's not actually, but that is where he is in the news. Had this earlier in our polls, but this is where the media and trial balloons are connected together. Bill Clinton's administration was famous for leaking out information. And then basically it would be an unofficial poll. And as the media talked about it, if it was received favorably, they would go and do it. If it wasn't, then they would turn around and deny that they ever had it. Trump is one that uses Twitter a lot of times to use this. Now, it comes back to the old idea, is this following or leading? Again, are leaders supposed to do something because it's popular or what's best for the country? All right, key words that you need to know, vocabulary, is horse race journalism here. And this is where, with our section for the polls, and where the media just as over time has gotten more and more, not obsessed with the polls, but spends more times on it. Some of the people would say it's just laziness. It's real easy to just go and talk for 10, 15 minutes about a poll that doesn't take much research. You just put the poll and you have it. And we look at it like a horse race when we go and see in the campaign trail and say, Joe Biden right now, he's extended his poll ratings where he's now 7% over Donald Trump. And that's where that idea that's like a race in there, using tracking polls in here. Again, we're going to have a variety of things, and this is where normally we look at investigative journalism as good, but this is where for political science you look at some things, and there are some negative things when we look at the press, or can be written as negative. Are Americans too cynical because we find so much of the investigation? We find out about corruption again and again, or bad things are done with the tax. Another side that we'll have later on is, does the media actually cause more government? Because as they expose problems, a lot of times the solution is yet more government. This is why a lot of times you will have that people will say that the media is liberal, because liberals normally want more government. Well, if the media is pointing out more problems, that would mean more government. But on the side for investigative journalism, this is where the question comes is, are people more cynical because the media ends up pointing out a lot more of the negative things, and again, not as much of the positive. Another vocabulary term is a media event. It is pretty straightforward, is you have something that is staged. You want to make it look like it's spontaneous, it's grassroots, but it is something that is made for the media. We see a Trump rally, you will notice that they try to have an entire rainbow of people that are sitting behind him on there. It is not really as a true cross-section of his crowd, but again, for the media and where the camera is, what they want. Hillary Clinton in 2016 had a hard time with her campaign because they tried to stage so much that it just looked fake there. All right, infotainment we had earlier in the comedy news and then talk radio, and this is where, and then your media bias, reason why I said for you to watch something else besides Fox and MSNBC here is, there are the strengths on both sides. Talk radio is dominated by conservatives. Rush Limbaugh, Sean Hannity are some of the best examples. there. For the infotainment there, you think of the Daily Show, Samantha Bee, a lot of our late night shows they have, and that's usually more of a liberal stronghold. And if you see the money that's been made by Rush Limbaugh, Jon Stewart before he retired, it is very lucrative for what they're doing. All right, these next two things kind of going to switch back and forth in here. The first vocabulary words you need to know is to know the difference between a press release, press briefing, and a press conference. A press release is when they will issue on such and such topic. So the president believes X, Y, and Z on this issue. It's just a one-way, there's no questions about it. A press briefing usually has a press release, then you will have the press secretary that will come out, or a spokesperson for the politician there. And then they will tell about what the press release is, maybe give a little more details. They will then have questions. Now, a lot of these press briefings are a lot more than what the topic is at that time. Then we have a press conference. In a press conference, the president will then come out and he will tell about the subject matter, and then usually we'll have questions in that way. Now, where I say what's the difference between the briefing and the press conferences, press briefings are usually with the press secretary or an aide, and the press conference is with the president. Now, for spin or spin doctors, spin is when you are speaking for another person, like the press secretary, and if there's something negative that's happened, you try to go and word it in a way to make a negative into a positive. So you spin the story there. So it's a tough job to do, and for every president, it's being the press secretary is one of the toughest jobs that you've had there. I mean, and you'll have questions that you maybe would think would never be asked, but they are. Or you get the same questions over and over again about something that isn't that way. Being the press secretary, you have to speak for the president there, and you have to try to know what he or she is thinking at that time there. And again, it's a tough job. President Trump's press secretaries have had a very hard time, although Sarah Huckabee Sanders is seen as incredibly skillful with it. Bill Clinton's press secretary, George Stephanopoulos, which launched his career, was also very difficult. He got tired of being asked all kinds of questions about Bill Clinton's sexual life. For the press secretary and the press conference, we have this briefing room. It's actually it's probably just about the same size as our classroom, except for about twice as long. And you see how packed it is in there. Normally, what you will have is you will have people with more years or on higher press corps, like ABC, Scripps Howard, Fox News. They're going to be up near the front. The smaller ones and newer people are going to be in the back. Now, what happens here is that the president will be having back and forth with them, and there's a press corps that follows them around. I have the question on here of how's the relationship between the press and the president, and I say normally. President Trump, we are not in normal times. But normally, if you are the press, you want to have a good relationship with the president because you need the president in order to have these stories. But at the same time, you can't be overly friendly with the president. Otherwise, people will not think that you are sincere or you're truthful about it. On the other side, you can't just go and constantly knock the president, because then they're going to basically draw back and you're not going to get your stories. And the president has the other way around. They got to make sure that they have a relationship because they need the press. So it's a relationship that they both need each other. Now, President Trump's been a little different. He bypasses the press and goes straight to Twitter. And a lot of times he has a very adversarial side. But the press actually loves Trump because it makes good ratings. Now, how do different presidents, how they worked with things for the press? Again, Trump a lot of times will call fake news, but he will go around and use his own resources. President Bush, he had this lady, Helen Thomas, who I mean, you see the picture in the right-hand corner, where back in the 60s, her with JFK, but she was one of the most senior members on the press corps, always wore a bright dress, and early on in his presidency, she asked a question that was out of bounds, something that shouldn't have been asked. And pretty much President Bush froze her out. For the next 8 years, she's up in the front, bright dress. Whenever he was asking questions, she's raising her hand. He would never call on her and just basically act like she didn't exist. Meanwhile, Bush When you're in the press corps with him, you want to get a nickname because he loved having nicknames. President Obama, the way that he dealt with it is he just didn't talk to the press a whole lot. For most of his presidency, he gave very few press conferences. Most of his presidency, he would sit down and have one-on-one interviews, but it would be a hand-picked person. So he didn't have that back and forth with the press, and he didn't have a lot of these surprise questions there. President Trump has actually been even different because he'll have impromptu press conferences all the time. That's why, again, even though it is seen as a bad relationship, the press actually loves him because they need him to speak. They need to get those quotes that you have in here. All right, this is a recurring trend that we have in AP. Make sure that you know who gets the most coverage, which is pretty easy to president, but why? All right, why does the president have the most there? Which your answers vary from various things. That there's one president, while there's 435 representatives, 100 senators, 9 Supreme Court justices, so there's just one of them. In the eyes of many people, the president is seen as the most important there. So that's where we are. It's the most well-known. People know who the president is. They may know their senators. They may know their representative, but they don't know the other ones. In Congress, it is the leadership that gets the most. The Speaker of the House, the majority leader, the minority leaders. If you are the head of top committees, those are the people that get the most. The Supreme Court has the least amount. There's various reasons for this. The biggest reason of all is not actually no cameras. That is a reason, but most of the things they have is very complex, and you can't just have a soundbite or two about it. So this is where for the Supreme Court, there's only probably 100 cases or so that are really deeply followed or probably about 10 cases that are followed out of their 100 every year. They don't have cameras. They don't have live audio normally. So again, it's kind of a delayed reaction. Now, right now we are out with COVID, and this is where some of the oral arguments are done with the audio. And the audio has been being shared with the media. So we actually are more open with the Supreme Court right now than what is normally done. All right, the FCC, most of you know of this or will know of this when we get to the bureaucracies. They're the ones that regulate the communications, the Federal Communications Commission. What most of you are most associated with is this is why, like if you watch the Daily Show, they have to bleep out when there's an F-bomb on there. But for the media side that we're saying here, there's a rule that you cannot have more than 35% of the market. So it doesn't matter as much now. It used to mean a lot more if you owned all the TV stations or radio stations, so that's what people hear. Now with so many things streamed and national and cable, that probably wouldn't be as important. The equal time rule. The equal time rule says that a station must at least offer equal time when they're selling their advertisements. It doesn't mean that they will have it, because if one side cannot purchase enough, they won't, but they have to at least offer it. You can't be just Democrat or just Republican. Don't get that mixed up with the fairness doctrine that we had earlier. The fairness doctrine, which went away in the early 1980s or 1980s, that was one when you said that if a station had a Republican, they had a Democrat on both sides. That again with cable went away. Here's where it seems odd, and especially when you think about today where Saturday Night Live does so much of making fun of Donald Trump. This is where the Republicans complained about during the primaries when he was running for president, that he was on Saturday Night Live and got all that free press. But again, you have to realize it's about ratings, whether it be an entertainment show or whether it be a news show. Donald Trump was going to get Saturday Night Live good ratings. Jeb Bush probably wasn't going to. So that's where it comes to it. All right, kind of a tricky thing that we have is going back to the last section where we have a lot less traditional media, but we have a lot more possibility for citizen journalists. So basically untrained media. And it's both good and bad. We do have a chance to have it being more democratic. We have more people that can report on things. The problem that we have are, why is the reason they're doing it? I mean, they still could have the profit motive that they have, or they may have some sort of slant and a bias on purpose. Also, how professional are they? Again, there's a lot of things in journalism that today we really are questioning some of the practices, but at the same time, when they are doing a video log or a blog or something like that. And then again, are they opinions or is it news? Which we had the same thing in our news. If you watch Rachel Maddow or Sean Hannity, okay, it's more an opinion shows, not news. And then we have a fake news problem in America today, where we have made up things. And I'm not talking about Donald Trump when he yells at anything that's against him as fake news. I'm talking about truly something that is not true, that is then published, and then it is forwarded to other people and retweeted. But the internet is great. Obama was considered the first internet president, but Donald Trump has showed how to use social media. He controls a lot of what is talked about with Twitter. But the thing about for the politicians, they can go and they can go in what would be seen as the old-fashioned door-to-door campaigning. If I want to know about what a candidate believes in, I can go right to their website. I don't have to have it filtered through traditional media. You can do grassroots things and get people together on fan pages and Facebook accounts that you have. Again, Twitter, you can send things out in a short bit and get your message out bypassing the traditional media. You can organize support. You can go organize fundraisers. Last night was the vice presidential debate that we had. Within 30 minutes, the Biden campaign had a fundraiser, and it was being spread virally where they were selling fly swatters after there was a fly that kept on landing on Vice President Pence's hair. So that's where you can have a lot of things to bypass traditional things. We've talked about this a couple different times this year, but this is where some people say for Trump, this is where, and I could easily see you have an AP question, not asking with Trump, but talking about how could you use something in social media. And Trump's tweets, the first thing they have, preemptive framing. He can make sure that what he wants to be talked about is talked about, and also the way that he wants it talked about. So when he sends out a tweet and then that is what the media is talking about, he can use it for diversion. When there is something that it doesn't like, well, you tweet something else and get that topic that you have. Deflection. You pretty much change direction. You attack the messenger. We've seen this for the Trump campaign, for a lot of what they have done is to claim some of the things that they're claim the same thing for Biden. And, mentioned before, it's a trial balloon. All right, what's popular? What catches on there? This is a little different than a chart that we had before. The chart was saying about where people get their news from, which at that time you saw that it was almost 50% that people got their news from Facebook. But here's different social media sites. This is from 2018. And there, Facebook is still the biggest. YouTube is only now expanded more than just the videos, where you can say there's some news and things like that, and it's become streaming there. Where someone asked where TikTok would fall, probably somewhere between Snapchat and Instagram and that area that you have. But that's where for the social media. All right, this last section, I have a hodgepodge of things and just ideas. And this is where for the vocabulary, the concepts that you need to know. All right, what impact does the media have? It's not an easy answer, because sometimes one story might bring something up, but sometimes it just takes multiple stories that you have. And this is where earlier that term selective exposure, because if you're watching an SMBC and all you see is the same thing over and over again, there you're preaching to the choir. Fox News, the same thing that you have there. And this is where you also, the effects when it gets combined together, and interest groups, elected officials and all that in here. And here's where for most political scientists, they say that direct impacts are not as much, but there's a lot of indirect impacts that you might have. And the one thing that was found is those that trust the media are more likely to say it shapes the agenda. All right, and for agenda, the vocabulary what you need, what attracts the attention of the policymakers. So media can change what the focus is, where sometimes it isn't, sometimes they will. One of the things that in that vice presidential debate last night is that Kamala Harris was just trying to make sure that she just didn't make a mistake where they're ahead in the polls. They didn't want something that suddenly was an aha moment that gets replayed over and over again. So she played it safe, because there have been times that presidents, when they make some sort of, or candidates, when they make the mistake statement, they say everything else right, but they make something wrong. That is where it's played over and over again. Plus, what's the focus? Both 1992 and 2016, the economy was coming out of recession there, but what was the focus? In 2019, they did not talk about how low interest rates were, but unemployment was high. 2016, they didn't talk about how unemployment was real low. There, they were focusing on the gap that we have in the economic hardships. We're going to have an entire section on interest groups, but this is where interest groups are going to work, and you try to use the media to get your attention. There's a picture there for PETA, People Against the for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, and this is where you kind of think Lady Gaga when she was wearing a meat suit there, and this is where they can get the attention of the media. They will do press releases. They're going to try to get information on their side. One thing that if you're a group, you have to try to get a long-term positive image. And that's where it's kind of tricky on things, because if you are doing a protest, I mean, how far do you go with it until you basically are seen as a negative with the group? We started out with this in the first part of the media notes on there, but the media is supposed to be a watchdog. They're supposed to watch government. There. And this is where I mentioned about how it indirectly encourages the growth, because as we see problems, oh, well, we need to have this or that, and new bureaucracies are made and government grows there. One thing that you see here is, even though we have more opportunities, people don't usually like to go about complicated political issues. They won't want to go that deep in it. This is a major trend that we have had. The media has made it where people can be more individualistic. The power of the party has gone down. We're focusing more on the leaders, the president. We are. If you are wealthier, like Rick Scott here for the state of Florida, even though the Republican Party didn't support him very much, he was able to fund his own campaign, use the media for that. President Trump is another example of that, where the Republicans did not support him, and then we've turned around and 4 years later go from Republicans trying to bring him down to the fact that today he pretty much controls the Republican Party going into this election. Some of the things that have been emphasized on recent AP exams, the idea of a gatekeeper, where the media is the one that has the policy agenda, they set the agenda for what's going to be said, the formation of how it goes. So what does the public view? Horse race coverage was sometimes called a scorekeeping, who's winning, who's losing, who's ahead there. So we basically pay a lot less attention to the policy side, but to who is winning. Here's an example of one of the recent questions, 2016. You see the goal, the gatekeeping there. We see scorekeeping in here. Later on we'll get to interest groups there. But the media as a linkage institution is a reoccurring theme.